regarding the objectives of the program, the whole idea was that those of you who have come here today, this afternoon, perhaps will agree with me. I was just telling the director just before our session started. In fact, that of course he didn't know, that in the Indian universities, it has now become almost a kind of practice that whether you come from, say, literature or, say, pure philosophy or, say, history, sociology, political science, in all these disciplines, many of these figures will be discussed, that is representing the German intellectual tradition. So maybe Kant, it may be Hegel, it may be Wittgenstein, it may be Habermas, it may be Hannah Arendt, Herbert Marcuse, Marx. They are taught, they are studied in most of the disciplines. So I fully agree with him. He was just telling me they are all primarily philosophers. But in the Indian universities, they are all being taught, of course, from different angles. Say a person who is studying sociology has to study, for example, when studying sociology of knowledge, etc., Heidegger, for example, has to study. So that way, one of the major objectives of this program was to, say, introduce these thinkers by highlighting most of their important elements of their thought. Of course, it is not possible, all of us understand that just in 2 sessions it is not possible to cover Immanuel Kant. Particularly after what Dr. Welde has made comments on Kant, that is almost unreadable even in German. So that way, of course, it's a very, very ambitious thing. That is covering each thinker just in 2 sessions. But broadly, the whole objective is to expose all of you, and I myself also have come here primarily as a listener, that is to know about these philosophers, these thinkers. And it is mainly, in fact, many of the resource persons, they asked me that whether, that is at what level we should address. Is it meant for a very specialized audience? I categorically stated no. It's not meant for any specialized audience. Because people from various disciplines, even here I know here is one person who is teaching commerce in a college. So he is also interested. So there are many people, and this I think is one of the very interesting features of Calcutta's intellectual life, that there are many people who professionally say are not associated with any teaching or anything. Say studying, doing some job in a bank, but extremely interested, say Marcuse or Heidegger or things like that. So this is a very interesting aspect of Kolkata's intellectual life. So that way, all sorts of people have come here, and it is mainly meant for the uninitiated. Some of them are already exposed. So that way is a very mixed sort of thing, and it will be primarily addressed at that level. And all of you have got the files. There you will find some reading materials, a broad, say, sketch about Kant's ideas. So that way, our subsequent lectures will be held. This is one thing. The other thing is that our whole idea is, if you look at the layout of this room and the way the chairs have been arranged, this desk has been arranged, the way Dr. Welde is sitting here, so that makes the whole thing very informal. And we want to make it very informal. It's not that there is a rostrum, there is a dash, which immediately, say, distances those who are being addressed and the person who is addressing. So we want to, say, abolish this whole idea of distance. So it should be very informal. And I had a talk with the resource persons that it will be a sort of, say, of course it will be done in English, but when necessary, of course, he will explain it in Bengali. Those of you who want to ask questions, you can ask it in English, you can ask it in... It's a very informal sort of, say, interactive session. But still, every academic session must have a structure. So our whole idea is that just at 3 we will begin our first session. Our resource persons have already come here. So the first session, it will start at 3. So that will end at, I think, 5. And the whole idea is, that is, he will speak for, I think, 3 to 5. That is the first session. So, and it is left to the resource person. He will conduct the session in his own way. So he will speak on the theme that has already been stated. And it will be followed up by discussion, intervention, interaction. Then we will have a refreshment break for half an hour, I think, 5 to 5:30. And then 5:30 to 7:30, our second resource person, he has also come. So he will address the second section. This is how we'll move on. And our next program will be held on November 30th. So that will be on Hegel. Those of you who have already signed the papers there, you have seen that those who are interested in attending the Hegel session, please sign it. And this time actually, we feel a bit sorry about it, but we just couldn't help it. Because after this whole program was announced and this enrollment started, lots of inquiries came. Many people expressed their interest, they want to attend the program, but we ultimately found it would be absolutely unmanageable. It would exceed 50 or like that. But you can understand that from given the accommodation constraint, other resource constraint. So that way we have to, as far as I remember, 36 participants. About 36 participants have enrolled. I think just leaving aside 1 or 2, most of you have come. It looks almost full, the whole room. So that way, this is how we want the program to be conducted. But ultimately it is for you to decide how we will do it. And the discretion is with the resource person. So with these words, I would like to conclude, and I'd like to thank very much Dr. Well, the director, the staff of Max Mueller Bhavan Library, and last but not the least, Mr. You please come here. He's Parthapratim Chattopadhyay. He is the librarian, and he actually is coordinating this whole program on behalf of Max Mueller Bhavan. So that way, a very big thank you to all for attending. And now we just start without wasting any further time. We start our next session, that is a real academic business session. And I would like to, Subir Babu, please come. Professor Subir Ranjan Bhattacharya is our resource person for the first session. So he has been teaching Kant for a very long time. Many of you are his students here, so you know him very well. In fact, we have tried to pick up most well-known resource persons on different subjects. So he has been teaching Kant for a very long time. And when I requested him, he was my former colleague in Calcutta University. The moment I requested him, he immediately responded. So I thank him very much that he has agreed. And without wasting any further time, it's just 3. So I now leave it to Professor Bhattacharya. You just take chair and you are in charge.
না ঠিক আছে
I feel honored to be invited to deliver this lecture on Kant in this series of lectures to to be held on the German philosophical tradition from Kant to Habermas. I would like to thank Dr. Welde, the director of Max Mueller Bhavan, and the other organizers of this program for inviting me. I have the most unenviable task of speaking on a philosopher which, as Dr. Welde has already told you, is unreadable. Well, since Kant is a difficult philosopher to understand, no doubt about it, but no one can be a serious student of philosophy unless he has read Kant. There is an adage which I think is true. One can philosophize with Kant or against Kant, but not without Kant. So we have to read Kant. Well, Kant has authored many books. Three of his most important works are, as some of you know, the three critiques: the critique of pure reason, the first critique known as the first critique, the critique of practical reason, the second critique, and critique of judgment, the third critique. I shall be concerned only with the first critique, and in the second session, Professor Khan will speak on the second and the third critique. So I shall confine myself to the first critique, critique of pure reason, which is concerned with Kant's theory of knowledge and metaphysics, his attitude towards metaphysics. Kant, the problem with which Kant is concerned in this book is the question of the possibility of metaphysics. That is his primary concern. Now here, the revolutionary idea of Kant is this, that we should not start with metaphysics, but with epistemology. Epistemology is propedeutic to metaphysics. Before engaging ourselves in metaphysical enterprises, we should consider the question of knowledge. Why does Kant think so? So let us start with, I'm assuming nothing. I will start from the scratch because some of you are not students of philosophy, not acquainted with philosophy, so I shall not assume anything. What is metaphysics? The first question that needs to be addressed is, what is metaphysics? Metaphysics in the traditional sense is the study of the ultimate reality or realities. Now, what are the ultimate realities? We can say that the ultimate realities are God, soul, and the universe as a whole. These are studied in three branches of metaphysics: rational theology, which is the study of God; rational cosmology, which is the study of the universe as a whole; and rational psychology, which is concerned with soul or self. Now, let us start with the question, why do the metaphysicians concern themselves with these realities, which they consider to be realities? Why are they interested in these questions? This is because, let us start with the primary question. Suppose we are trying to know what is the cause of a phenomenon A. What is the cause of A? We want explanation. Human reason always seeks explanation. So if an event happens, we want to know what is the cause of it. Now, A has happened. What is the cause of A? Now we explain A by reference to another phenomenon, say B. So B is the cause of A, A is being explained in terms of B, so we can say B is the condition of A. But our reason does not stop here. It does not remain satisfied with this. It wants to know what is the cause of B. Now you explain B in terms of another factor, say C. Now what is the status of B then? B is the condition of A, but B is conditioned by C. So B is a conditioned condition. It is a condition as well as it is conditioned. Now, we have said C is the cause of B. What is the cause of C? The question haunts us again. And we then bring in another factor, say D. So D is the cause of C. Then C again becomes condition. So our explanations, ordinary explanations, are always in terms of conditioned conditions. But reason is not satisfied with these explanations. We want ultimate explanations. Explanations which will stop all questions. But so long as we remain in this phenomenal cause-effect series, we do not get ultimate explanation. So we posit God as the cause of everything. God is the condition of everything, but he is himself unconditioned. So God is the unity. We are in search of unity. God is the unity behind all things. He is himself unconditioned, but he is the cause, he is the condition of everything. Thereby we posit God. And God is an absolute reality because whatever is conditioned is relative. And since God is unconditioned, God is absolute. So it is an absolute reality. In the same way, we posit self. We posit self. How? Before Kant, Hume, as an empiricist, tried to answer the question, can we find the self in experience? Now, if you look within ourselves, what do we see? We have inner perception. In our inner experience, we have series of psychical states and processes, but we do not find the self. As Hume says, if you enter into yourself, what you can see, when I enter into myself, I feel pleasure, pain, but I can never observe anything but this series of perception. I cannot observe the self. Self cannot be observed. So what we have is a series of, or a collection of, psychical states. But then, how are we to unite these sundry experiences, psychical experiences? So we posit self as the unity behind all these psychical states. Self is not itself such a psychical state. It stands as the unity behind this. So we posit self, although we do not find self in our experience. There is no impression corresponding. There is no corresponding impression to the idea of self. This is how metaphysics creeps in. And metaphysicians are interested in such questions as God, soul, and the universe as a whole. And Kant says that these questions, metaphysics, man has a natural disposition towards metaphysics. Metaphysical questions, they are questions which arise from the very nature of human reason. We cannot but raise metaphysical questions. We have a natural propensity to raise metaphysical questions because we are not satisfied with ordinary explanations. So we shall always posit God, we shall always posit self. So metaphysics arises from the very nature of human reason. So as a natural disposition, we are naturally disposed to raise metaphysical issues. we cannot but raise metaphysical issues because we have a hankering after the unconditioned. Now, is there any truth? Now the question that Kant is interested. In metaphysics, is there any established truth? Is there any truth which is admitted by all the metaphysicians? In sciences have made some progress. There are some truths in mathematics, in pure natural science, physics, which are admitted by all. But look at metaphysics. Kant begins with the antinomies by stressing on the contradictory state of metaphysics. Reason, metaphysics, as you understand, if metaphysics is to be possible, it is a study by means of pure reason, because God is not within our field of experience, nor do we find the self by experience. So it is an object of study, and we can study it by means of pure reason alone. Now, in some fields, in mathematics and natural science, we have certain truths which are admitted by all. There is agreement among the scientists regarding some truths, and there is also agreement regarding the procedure to be followed, the method to be followed. And if there is any dispute among the scientists, they know the method by which this dispute can be settled. There is a procedure. But look at metaphysics. One metaphysician says that the world, the universe, had a beginning in time and is limited in space. Another metaphysician, he is using reason, by employing reason. He is claiming that universe had no beginning in time. So just the contradictory views. One metaphysician says the universe had a beginning in time and is limited in space. And another metaphysician says the universe had no beginning in time and it is unlimited. Now, both these propositions cannot be true. They are contradictory. Now, how to settle the dispute? Both are employing reason to know whether the universe had a beginning or not. So this is a contradictory, this is what Kant calls an antinomy, a pair of contradictory propositions, which are made by means of pure reason, by the operation of pure reason, but both of which cannot be admitted, but each can be justified by reason. So how to settle which of these two views is to be accepted? So metaphysics is the battleground of, and Kant also mentions some other antinomies. I need not mention all of them. I am just referring to this antinomy. So metaphysics, Kant says, is the battleground of endless controversies. There is controversy and controversy, not a single truth which can be admitted. And no metaphysician can suggest the method by which this dispute can be settled. No one can be contradicted by experience. We are going beyond the real, we are talking about something which is beyond the field of experience. So we cannot take the help of experience to settle the issue. This is not an empirical issue. This is a speculative issue, and therefore cannot be settled by experience. This is one of the reasons which disturbed Kant. Now, if this happens in the case of metaphysics, this not only, this is a question, this contradiction in metaphysics perturbed Kant, because in some other fields, by pure reason, we can obtain truths, necessary truths, in the field of mathematics and in the field of natural science. Reason is the source of a priori truths in some other fields. But here, reason generates controversies. Now the question arises, why is it that in some fields we are getting some truths which are universal or necessary, but in some other field, in metaphysics, we are not. We are getting controversies and contradictions. So the question arises, is there any contradiction within reason itself? So this threatens common sense and science, Perhaps something is wrong with reason. We are employing metaphysical enterprise is prima facie justified because we are employing the faculty which is used by the mathematicians and by the scientists. So by employing the same faculty, they are employing the faculty of reason, we are also employing the faculty of reason. But in our case, this is controversy, but in their case, they claim to get necessary and universal truth. But since there is skepticism here, we can extend this skepticism to other fields also. So we can doubt whether we are claiming to know universal and necessary truths. Perhaps they are not universal and necessary truths. So there is contradiction within reason. So what is required? Kant says, the dogmatic rationalists suppose that reason can know absolutely anything and everything. There is no limit to our knowledge. We can know anything by the operation of reason, and this has resulted in these controversies and contradictions, and this results in a sort of skepticism. And as a reaction to this, rationalistic dogmatist arose a skepticism, and Kant admits the influence of Hume upon him. He said, Hume aroused me from my dogmatic slumber. Hume concerned himself with the metaphysical concept of causality. We say, water quenches thirst. Water is the cause of quenchment of thirst. So there is a causal relation between the two. Now, how do we know this statement? Fire is the cause of burning. These statements we make. Fire is the cause of burning. Now, how do we know it? Now, if by pure reason we could know it, then simply by analyzing the concept of fire, we could know that it causes burning. But this is not the case, because if by mere analysis of the concept we could get it, then the denial of this judgment would have resulted in a contradiction. If I say fire is not the cause of burning, no contradiction arises. Fire is not the cause of burning. It is logically possible to think that fire is not the cause of burning. There is no contradiction in it. If I say that a triangle is not three-sided, there is contradiction. Because to say that a triangle is not three-sided is to say that a three-sided figure is not three-sided. So it is not possible. But I can very well think of the opposite of this statement. So by mere operation of reason, this is not knowable. Now, it is supposed that there is a necessary connection between fire and burning. Fire has the power to produce burning. So there is a necessary connection between the two. If we put our hands into fire, it will burn. Now Hume said, this necessary connection we cannot get by reason, and this is not obtainable by experience also. In our experience, what do we see? We see that in many cases, fire is followed by burning. If you put into your hands into fire, it burns. We have observed these in so many cases. One event happens after another event. As a result of this, these two events get associated in our mind. And as a result of this, seeing fire, we imagine that if we put our hands into it, it will burn. These two events have got associated in our mind. There is no objective connection between the two. Fire has not got the power to burn. We feel in our mind, there is a feeling of necessity in our mind that fire will burn. This is because they have been constantly conjoined. We have in our experience seen them happening together. As a result of this, a custom or habit is formed in our mind. So, on the appearance of one, we can infer the other. So by experience also, we do not get any necessary connection between the two. So the causal principle, this causality, this causal relation, it is not discoverable by reason, nor can it be discovered by experience. Now this principle, every event has a cause, therefore has no rational basis. It has no rational basis. Now if it has no rational basis, then science is in danger, because in science we admit this principle. So on Hume's theory, Hume's empiricism leads to skepticism. There is no rational foundation for our beliefs in the objective world. Now Kant tried to combat both rationalism, the dogmatic rationalist, whom he called dogmatists, and Humean skepticism. And for this, he first raised the question, do not indulge in a metaphysical speculation first. Reason has been employed, used to attain knowledge about supersensible entities. Dogmatist, rationalist, this is an uncritical assumption on the part of the dogmatist to think that reason can give us knowledge about everything. Hume showed by his analysis what reason cannot do. But he also did not consider the question what reason can do. He did not go the whole way. He considered only what reason cannot do. But what reason can do, he did not consider this question. So Kant thinks that what is required, first of all, is not to employ reason, but to undertake a critical examination of reason. This is what he does in his critique of pure reason. Critique of pure reason means critical examination of pure reason. Pure reason itself is the object of inquiry. Reason is the faculty of a priori knowledge. So what we have to do is to examine this faculty itself. If I use an analogy, this has been given by Caird. We use telescope for seeing distant objects. Now whether we shall be able to see any object will depend upon the power of the lens of the telescope. We cannot see anything and everything that we please simply by using a telescope. Telescope enables us to observe distant objects. Yes. So reason by reason we can know something, but what can we know? This has to be, in order to answer this question, we have to examine the faculty itself. So pure reason should be made the object of inquiry. So what we have to understand is what is the role of reason? And therefore, reason is the object of inquiry. Now, who will inquire? Reason is the inquirer. Reason is the subject of inquiry also. Critical examination of pure reason. Who will undertake this inquiry? Who will criticize? Who will examine reason? Reason will examine itself. So pure reason is the examiner and pure reason is the examinee. So the examiner and the examinee are the same, one and the same. So reason, pure reason, is the critique of pure reason is a self-examination of pure reason. We have to understand how far, what are the conditions of knowledge. It is a critical examination of pure reason with a view to, critique of pure reason is a critical examination of pure reason with a view to, pure reason means the faculty of a priori knowledge, with a view to investigating the conditions of knowledge, the limits of knowledge. So before answering the question whether metaphysics is possible or not, we have to inquire how far, what are the conditions of knowledge and What are the limits of knowledge? Once these questions are settled, only then we shall be in a position to answer whether metaphysics, which claims to give us knowledge about such transcendent entities, not entities which are suprasensible, God, soul, and the universe as a whole, they are knowable or not. So the first task is critical examination of pure reason. So we have to start with Kant's analysis of cognition. That is why Kant says epistemology precedes metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of ultimate realities. Now our first task is not studying reality. Our first task is to study the conditions of knowledge. Now, one of the best ways to study Kant's theory of knowledge is to start with his classification of, twofold classification of judgments. Kant's theory of knowledge is unique in every respect. In some books of history of philosophy, Kant is shown to be an eclectic philosopher who has taken something from empiricism and something from rationalism and then joined them together. No, he is a revolutionary thinker. He has synthesized, and this synthesis is unique. So that would be, this is not the right way to represent Kant. Kant has synthesized rationalism and empiricism, and his critique of pure reason begins with the assertion, all our knowledge begins with experience. This is the first line of his critique of pure reason. All our knowledge begins with experience. Now, this very assertion is the point of departure, from rationalism. A rationalist will say that reason is the only source of knowledge. By the mere operation of reason, we can know everything. And Kant will say, no, knowledge begins with experience. So without experience, we cannot have any knowledge. But then, Kant does not stop here. In the next paragraph, he says, although all our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. It begins with experience, but it does not all arise out of experience. That is to say, experience is just the starting point of knowledge, but knowledge, it is not the culmination. Experience is a factor, but it is not the whole of knowledge. So this is where Kant parts company from the empiricists. He is neither a rationalist nor an empiricist. He is a critical thinker. He is a critical thinker because he is undertaking a critical inquiry into the faculty of knowledge. Faculties of knowledge. He is a critical thinker, neither an empiricist nor a rationalist. It would not be proper to call him a rationalist or an empiricist. He belongs to neither of these two camps. So his position is different from both. Now, that is why I would like to start in order to show wherein lies his difference from both the rationalists and the empiricists. Let us start with his classification of judgment, which is also unique, which is not there in pre-Kantian philosophy, neither the rationalists nor the empiricists. Kant begins with a twofold principle of classification of judgment. His first distinction is between pure and empirical knowledge. Pure and empirical knowledge. Knowledge, according to Kant, is always judgmental. So, in saying that, he is making a distinction between pure and empirical knowledge. We mean it is a distinction between pure and empirical judgments. Pure and empirical judgments. Knowledge is always judgmental. non-judgmental knowledge Kant will not admit. Now, a priori, by pure Kant means a priori knowledge. Pure is equivalent to a priori. Although I would hasten to add that at one point in the critique, Kant speaks of pure a priori knowledge. So in that case, a priori and pure are not equivalent expressions. I shall mention that. Generally, pure is identical with a priori. But there are cases of pure a priori knowledge, Kant thinks. But this is found only at one place in the entire critique. I will mention it. Now, what is a priori knowledge? We have already said that all our knowledge begins with experience. Now, by a priori, something is a priori if it is prior to experience. Prior to experience. Now, what is meant by prior to experience? If all our knowledge begins with experience, how can there be any knowledge which is prior to experience? No knowledge can be temporally prior to experience. If we say that a priori knowledge is prior to experience, then Kant would be involved in a self-contradiction. So what is the point in saying that a priori knowledge is prior to experience? Here, prior means logically prior, not temporally prior. A priori knowledge is knowledge which is logically independent of experience and impressions of the senses. Logically independent. Let us take an example. All bachelors are unmarried. In order to determine, here, the concept of bachelor is an empirical concept. We obtain this concept from experience. The concept of an unmarried person is also empirical. But the judgment, all bachelors are unmarried, this is not an empirical judgment. This is an a priori judgment. Because in order to determine the truth of this judgment, we need not appeal to experience. No appeal to experience is required for the determination of the truth of this judgment. If you know the meaning of bachelor, you know it to be true. So all bachelors are unmarried. This is an a priori proposition. So a priori does not mean temporally prior to experience. It means logically prior. So an a priori judgment is that which is logically independent of experience and all impressions of the senses. And empirical judgment, an empirical judgment is that the validity of which is determined by appeal to experience. For example, the wall is white. How do I know it to be true? Simply by the operation of reason. We cannot say that this is true. We have to know it by experience. On the basis of experience, we know that the wall is white. So this judgment is empirical. Now, by a priori, Kant does not mean prior to this or that experience. There are judgments which we can say, not which the truth or falsity of which we can determine, not on the basis of experience, but say, let us take the judgment. If the foundation of this house, when the foundation of this house will become weak, this house will collapse. Now, do I make this judgment on the basis of experience? On this experience, as long as this house is here, there is no question of my observing that the house will fall. But so in a sense, this is a priori. I do not make the judgment on the basis of experience. I have not observed the house to fall now. But although it is prior to experience, it is not absolutely prior to experience. Because ultimately, this judgment is based upon experience. When I say that when the foundation of this house will become weak, it will fall down, I can say this because I know that all houses whose foundations are weak will fall. And this judgment is based upon my prior experience that houses whose foundations were weak fell down. So, ultimately, this judgment is not independent of experience. It is based upon experience. So, this is not an example of a priori, what Kant means by a priori. Another example of a priori would be 7 plus 5 equal to 12. In order to know this judgment, truth of this judgment, I need not appeal to experience. So this is Kant's criteria. This is how Kant makes a distinction between a priori and empirical judgment, and in this connection, he mentions two criteria of a priori knowledge or judgment. And a priori judgment is characterized by strict universality and necessity. Now, what does Kant mean by necessity? By a necessary judgment, Kant means a judgment the opposite of which is impossible. The opposite of which is impossible. An a priori judgment, the opposite of an a priori judgment is impossible. All bachelors are unmarried. I have mentioned this as an example of a priori judgment. Now, the opposite of this judgment is impossible. The opposite of this judgment is all bachelors are not unmarried. This means, logically, some bachelors are not unmarried. Now, for bachelor, we substitute unmarried persons because bachelor means unmarried. So this amounts to saying some unmarried persons are not unmarried. This means there is at least one person who is unmarried and not unmarried. So this is a contradiction in terms. Some unmarried persons are not unmarried. So this is contradictory. So this is what necessity is. The opposite of a necessary proposition is impossible. And if a proposition is characterized by necessity, it is a priori. So we can say the judgment, all bachelors are unmarried, is an a priori judgment. And another feature of a priori judgment is its strict universality. 7 plus 5 equal to 12. This is a judgment to which no exception is allowed as possible. It will hold good at all places, at all times, in all places and at all times. 7 plus 5 equal to 12. This is an example of a strictly universal propositions. And in experience, this is an a priori judgment. Why? Because experience can never give us a necessity. The wall is white. This is an empirical judgment. Now, is there any necessity in this judgment? Can I not think of its opposite? I can think of it. There is no contradiction. There is no necessity in it. The wall must be white. I cannot say like that. The wall must be white. So there is no such a necessity. And necessity is a mark of a priority. So this is Kant's classification of judgment into a priori and empirical. Now Kant has offered another distinction, the distinction between analytic and synthetic judgments. In every categorical judgment is a judgment in which we consider the relation between the subject and the predicate. In every categorical judgment, affirmative categorical judgment, that is a judgment in which the predicate is affirmed of the subject. So in every affirmative categorical judgment, the relation between the subject and the predicate may be understood in two ways. Either the predicate concept is contained covertly, implicitly within the subject concept, or lies outside the subject concept. So there are two possibilities. Either the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept, or the predicate concept does not belong to the subject concept, although there is a connection between the two. Unless there is a connection between the subject concept and the predicate concept, there is no judgment. Because judgment is the coupling of concepts, connection of concepts. So there are two possibilities. Now when the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept, the judgment is analytic. And if the predicate concept is not contained in the subject concept, then the judgment is synthetic. What is meant by saying that the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept? This means the subject concept is a complex concept. The subject concept is a complex concept. You have to analyze the subject concept. So analysis of the subject concept is required. Now if you analyze the subject concept, you will find that the predicate concept is identical with at least one of the constituent concepts by means of which the subject concept has been formed. You analyze the subject concept, that is to say, if you break it up into its component concepts, you obtain the predicate concept as its part. If this is not so, that is to say, if by analyzing the subject concept, you do not get the predicate concept, the judgment is synthetic. Let us take the examples given by Kant. All bodies are extended. All bodies are extended. Now here the subject concept is the concept of body, and the predicate concept is the concept of extension. Now what is required? We have to analyze the subject concept. We cannot, simply by looking at the concept, we cannot say whether the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept or not. So analysis is required. Now you analyze the subject concept, the concept of body. By analyzing the subject concept, you get two concepts. The concept of substantiality, a body is a substance, and the concept of extendedness, the concept of substantiality and the concept of extendedness or extension. Now what is the predicate concept? Extendedness. So by analyzing the subject concept, you have obtained two concepts, and the predicate concept is identical with one of these two concepts. So we can say the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept. Isn't it so? By analyzing the subject concept, we have obtained the predicate concept. So the judgment is analytic. And in the case of all bodies are heavy, we have analyzed the subject concept and we have obtained two concepts, the concept of substantiality and the concept of extension. And the predicate concept is the concept of heaviness. The concept of heaviness is not there in the subject concept. It is not identical with any of these two concepts by means of which the subject concept has been formed. So it lies outside of the subject concept, but it is connected. It is nevertheless connected with the subject concept. Otherwise we could not make the judgment all bodies are heavy. So there is a connection, but the predicate concept is not obtainable from the subject concept. Therefore this judgment is synthetic. Another criterion, this is a criterion for determining whether a judgment is analytic or not. Now Kant has offered another criterion. He says the highest principle of all analytic judgments is the principle of contradiction. Is the principle of contradiction. So this gives us another criterion. An analytic judgment is that the denial of which is contradictory, self-contradictory. So, an analytic judgment has a self-contradictory, we could say like that. We could put it this way. A self-contradictory. That is to say, the contradictory of an analytic judgment is self-contradictory. A self-contradictory. All bachelors are all bodies are extended. We have given this example. Now, if you contradict this judgment, all bodies are extended, you get the judgment all bodies are not extended. This means all extended substances are not extended. And in logic, all not becomes some not. This means some extended substances are not extended. So, the opposite of, the contradictory of, all bodies are extended is self-contradictory. That is why I say an analytic judgment is that which is a self-contradictory. That is to say, whose contradiction is a self-contradiction. But this is not the case with a synthetic judgment. All bodies are heavy. If you contradict this judgment, you get the judgment all bodies are not heavy. This means some extended substances are not heavy. This is not of the form P and not P. This is not of this form. This is of the form P dot not Q. This is of this form. So there is no contradiction in it. So this is how Kant makes the distinction between analytic and synthetic judgment. Now this distinction, twofold classification of judgment is unique in Kant. Pre-Kantian philosophers, both the rationalists and the empiricists, their principle of classification of judgment was single principle. Leibniz distinguished between two types of judgments, truths of reason and truths of fact. Truths of reason and truths of fact. Truths of reason are necessary truths, and their opposites are impossible, self-contradictory. Truths of fact, they are contingent truths. There is no necessity in such judgments, and such judgments, they are contingent statements, and they are knowable by experience. Truths of fact. Hume made a distinction between two types of judgment: judgments concerning relations of ideas and judgments concerning matters of fact. Judgments concerning relations of ideas are discoverable by the mere operation of reason. By the mere operation of reason. So by means of reason we can know such judgments to be true. 7 plus 5 equal to 12 in Hume's, as an example taken from Hume. This judgment, it is a judgment concerning the ideas of 7, the ideas of 5, and the ideas of 12. So this judgment is a judgment which exemplifies a judgment concerning relations of ideas. And a judgment concerning matters of fact, the sun will rise tomorrow. This is a judgment concerning matters of fact. And this can be known only by experience. And Hume says the contrary of this judgment is possible. If I say the sun will not rise tomorrow, I do not contradict myself. There is no contradiction. Now, to the pre-Kantians, now if we combine the Kantian twofold principle, we get 4 types of judgment. A priori analytic, we have distinguished between a priori and a posteriori or empirical, and analytic and synthetic. Now combine these two. You get 4 types of judgment. Analytic a priori, analytic a posteriori, synthetic a posteriori, and synthetic a priori. There are 4 types of judgment possible. Of this, analytic a posteriori is a contradiction in terms, because no analytic judgment is founded upon experience, is based upon experience, and a posteriori judgment is based upon experience. So analytic a posteriori is ruled out. So there are 3 types of judgment: analytic a priori, synthetic a posteriori, and synthetic a priori. Kant admits these three types of judgments, of which synthetic a priori is the most important. Now the precantians, I have stated the precantian classification of judgment. Now if we express the precantian view in Kant's language in terms of the analytic synthetic terminology, which was introduced by Kant. Kant introduced this terminology into philosophy, analytic, synthetic. These two expressions were not there before. Kant introduced these expressions. So if we express the views of the precantian in Kantian language, we can say, for both the rationalist and the empiricists, a priori is identical with analytic. Only one type. A priori identical with analytic. A posteriori identical with synthetic. To put it more clearly, all a priori judgments are analytic and vice versa. All analytic judgments are a priori. So you can, if you admit only one type of, whenever you say a priori, you mean analytic. If you say analytic, you mean a priori. No distinction. And again, all a posteriori judgments are synthetic, and all synthetic judgments are a posteriori. There is no distinction. So a posteriori identical with, they are equivalent expressions. They are interchangeable. You can write one for the other. But Kant breaks this. He will not admit, he will admit only part of this. He will admit that all analytic judgments are a priori, but not the converse. All a priori judgments are analytic, he will not admit it. He will admit that all a posteriori judgments are synthetic, but not the other part. All synthetic judgments are a posteriori. He will not admit it. So he, for the first time, showed the possibility of a type of judgment which is both synthetic and a priori. For the precantians, syntheticity and a priority exclude each other. A judgment which is a priori can never be synthetic, and a judgment which is synthetic can never be a priori. But Kant breaks this clearly. He says he, for the first time, envisaged the possibility of a judgment being both synthetic and a priori. They do not exclude each other. So what is Kant's problem? There are three types of judgment: analytic a priori, synthetic a posteriori, and synthetic a priori. Now, Kant has admitted these three types of judgments, of which the first two types of judgment are admitted by the precantians also, analytic a priori and synthetic a posteriori. So this is not the problem for Kant. These two types of judgments are not problems for Kant. How are analytic a priori judgments possible? The simple answer is by conceptual analysis. If you analyze the subject concept, you get the judgment and you know it to be a priori. How are synthetic a posteriori judgments possible? By experience. So we can easily explain the possibility of these two types of judgment. So these two types of judgments have been admitted by the precantians, the rationalist and the empiricist. So this is not the point of dispute. So the onus is with Kant. You have admitted the possibility of synthetic a priori judgments. So you have to show how are such judgments possible. And Kant takes up this challenge. This is the central problem of Kant's critique. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? You get the point? This is the problem that Kant seeks to answer in his critique. Now this question is intimately related to the question how is metaphysics possible? I started saying that the problem that Kant seeks to answer is whether metaphysics is possible. Now, the question of the possibility of metaphysics is intimately connected with the question of the possibility of synthetic a priori judgments. These two questions are at bottom the same. Is metaphysics possible and are synthetic a priori judgments possible? These two questions are not separate questions. If we can answer the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, thereby we give an answer to the question whether metaphysics is possible or not. Now, this question, now Kant says that Hume in his analysis of causality raised the genuine issue. The metaphysical concept of causality Hume analyzed. But Kant says that the mistake of Hume is he did not consider that he confused the particular cause-effect relation with a universal law of causality. He could not distinguish between the two. Yes, so far as particular cause-effect relation is concerned, he analyzed this particular cause-effect relation, but he could not see that the universal law of causality, this is an a priori principle, and he sought to find out this principle in experience. That was a wrong search. He was searching for a principle at the wrong place. It is not to be found in experience. He could not realize it. The principle, every event has a cause. This is an a priori principle. The general principle of causality. Whenever any event happens, I can say a priori, it will have a cause. Certainly it has a cause. I need not see it. I can say it a priori. But if I am to determine what is the particular cause of a particular phenomenon, I cannot determine by pure reason a priori. I have to observe. So particular cause-effect relation cannot be determined a priori. But so far as the causality, this law of universal causality is concerned, it is not discoverable by experience because it is an a priori principle. That which is a priori, how can you find it in experience? This was Hume's first mistake. And Hume's second mistake was that Hume could not generalize the problem. Hume considered the principle of causality and arrived at a skeptical conclusion. It has no rational basis, thereby undermining, and this Hume's analysis undermines our objectivity, objective knowledge, science and common sense that we find in common sense. But Kant says Hume did not see that his attack on the principle of causality touches not only that principle, but also mathematics and pure natural science. Because in such fields also, there are truths which are not discoverable by conceptual analysis nor by experience. There are some judgments which are discoverable neither by experience nor by conceptual analysis, as in the case with the principle of causality. And Hume arrived at the conclusion, take any book of metaphysics. Does it contain any proposition concerning relation of ideas? No. Does it contain any proposition regarding matter of fact? No. Commit it then to the flames, Hume said, because it contains nothing but sophistry and delusion. This was Hume's conclusion. This was Hume's attitude towards metaphysics. But he considered, Kant says, Hume could not universalize the problem. He could not realize that the weapon that he has used to demolish that the concept of causality has no rational foundation touches also the heart of mathematics and natural science. But in mathematics and natural science, These are established sciences. These are established sciences. Mathematics is an established science. Physics, pure natural science. Pure physics is an established science. And in such sciences, we do have judgments which are universal, necessary, as well as synthetic. There are synthetic a priori judgments. We cannot deny. And these are established sciences. So you have to admit these judgments. So Kant's problem, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? This is not a single question. Kant subdivides this question into many questions. Divide these questions into many other sub-questions. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant has shown that such judgments can be found in mathematics. As examples of synthetic a priori judgments in mathematics, Kant cites some propositions. 7 plus 5 equal to 12. As an example of a synthetic a priori proposition in arithmetic. A straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. This is an example of a synthetic a priori judgment. I can also mention the judgment. This is also given by Kant. 2 straight lines cannot enclose a space. 2 straight lines cannot enclose a space. This is an example of a synthetic a priori judgment. Why it is synthetic and why it is a priori, I shall explain. In pure natural science, there are certain synthetic a priori judgments. For example, in all changes of the material world, the quantity of matter remains constant. This is an example of synthetic a priori judgment. Every event has a cause. This is also an example of a synthetic a priori judgment. And metaphysics, I told you that the question of the possibility of metaphysics and the question of the possibility of synthetic a priori judgments, they are intimately related. Metaphysics is not an established science. As I have already said, if it were an established science, we could find some propositions which are universally admitted, but there is not a single proposition in metaphysics which has been admitted by all the metaphysicians. But metaphysics contains, Kant says, at least in its intention of synthetic a priori judgment, consists of synthetic a priori judgments. Let us consider the judgment, God is omnipresent. God is omnipresent, or God is the cause of this universe. Now, is this judgment a priori? If it is possible at all, we have to see. If we can make this judgment on the basis of pure reason, appeal to experience will be of no help. So if it is possible, then it is an a priori judgment. And when a metaphysician says, God is the cause of this universe, he is claiming to give some new information. He is claiming to give some information about God. So this judgment contains novelty, which is a feature of synthetic judgment. So this judgment is synthetic a priori, if it is possible at all, if it is a genuine synthetic a priori proposition at all. So metaphysics contains, at least in its intention. The intention of the metaphysician is to make synthetic a priori judgments. Now the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? This has been subdivided into many questions. First, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in mathematics? Second question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in pure natural science? The third question is, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in metaphysics? These are the three questions. The last question can be divided again. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible in metaphysics as a science However, synthetic judgments a priori possible in metaphysics as natural disposition. So we have 4 questions. We have to consider 4 questions. First, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in mathematics? Now, what does how indicate here? What does how? How is the expression how used here? Now, in mathematics, there are synthetic a priori judgments. So when this question is raised, what we really want to know, what are the conditions which, on the basis of which we can make synthetic a priori judgments in mathematics. So this how is a request for explanation. This how, the question how in the first question, is a request for explanation. How to explain the synthetic a priori judgments that we find in mathematics. In the second case also, since physics or pure natural science, it is an established science, there are synthetic a priori judgments in it. In this case also, how means in what manner possible. In what manner are synthetic a priori judgments possible? Explain. What are the factors which make such judgments possible? Now, so far as metaphysics is concerned, is metaphysics an established science? Metaphysics has not yet established itself as a science. It claims to be. It claims to give us knowledge. So here, since it is not an established science, here how means whether we are claiming to make synthetic a priori judgments, it has to be considered whether our claim to give synthetic a priori knowledge is justified or not. So here how means whether possible. How does not, the expression how is not used in the same way in this question. And I divided the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in metaphysics, into 2 questions. As a science, so metaphysics has not established itself as a science. Therefore, here the question is whether metaphysics is possible as a science. But so far as our natural tendency is concerned, we do raise metaphysical questions. We do make such judgments. We say God is the cause of this universe. It is our natural tendency to say that soul is immortal. So we go on making such assertions. Why do we make such assertions? So here the question is not whether, the question is how. What is there in our nature? What are the psychological factors in us which prompt us to raise metaphysical questions? So these are the 4 questions which Kant considers in his critique. And all these questions are answered in different parts of the critique. In the part which he entitles Transcendental Aesthetic, he answers the questions, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in mathematics? In Transcendental Analytic, that is another part, I have not given the full division of the critique. I can state only the 3 main divisions: Transcendental Aesthetic, Transcendental Analytic, and Transcendental Dialectic. These are the 3 main divisions of the critique. In the Transcendental Aesthetic, we find Kant's answers to the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in mathematics? In Transcendental Analytic, Kant answers the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible in pure natural science? And in the third part, Dialectic, he shows why Kant will show as we proceed, as we explain Kant's theory of knowledge further, that transcendent metaphysics, which claims to give us knowledge about transcendent entities, is not possible. Because, I am stating the conclusion first, the limits of experience are the limits of knowledge. The limits of knowledge are the limits of experience, in whichever way you put it. You can have knowledge only about objects of possible experience. So if anything, this is a truth about human cognition. So far as human beings are concerned, human cognition for us, we human beings, it cannot transcend the boundaries of sense experience. So all our knowledge is limited to experience. So if a metaphysician claims to give us knowledge about God, knowledge about soul, he is claiming to give us knowledge about entities which transcend experience. And this is not possible. So Kant will show, on the basis of his analysis of knowledge, that metaphysics, transcendent metaphysics, does not or cannot give us knowledge because the conditions of knowledge are not applicable there. So there what we have is not knowledge but illusion. Kant will say these are illusions. These judgments, metaphysical judgments such as God is the cause of this universe, God is present everywhere, the universe at the beginning in time, these are pseudo-rational judgments. Judgments made by pure reason but not giving us genuine knowledge. These are illusions. Kant calls these transcendental illusions as distinguished from logical illusion. We try to understand this distinction. Now, so far as in some cases we commit errors and we are in a position to rectify our errors once it is pointed out wherein the mistake lies. There are, in logic classes, certain rules are stated. A student commits a mistake in applying the rule. We point out the mistakes he has committed. This is the rule you have broken. He understands the rule and he can guard himself off from further errors. He rectifies himself. But so far as illusions in metaphysics are concerned, we know that this is the case. We cannot have knowledge, but we go on committing the mistake because reason in us always hankers after the unconditioned. We will always search for the absolute unity behind all things soul. We shall search after God. We shall run a question whether is there any such thing as God. We will raise these questions, but we knowing fully well that these questions cannot be answered. So Kant begins his first preface by saying that human reason has this peculiar fact that in one species of its cognition, it is burdened by questions which it cannot ignore. It is burdened by questions which it cannot ignore. We cannot ignore metaphysical issues. They come from within because these questions are not external. They come from within ourselves. Our reason spurs us on to raise these questions. But the second part, these questions arise from within our reason, but there is no way of answering these questions. This is the fate of human reason. It is burdened by questions which it cannot ignore, but which, as transcending all its powers, human knowledge, there are certain conditions of human knowledge. And here, these conditions are not applicable. Therefore, we cannot have knowledge. And which, as transcending all its power, it cannot answer. And this branch is metaphysics. So after analyzing the knowledge situation and finding out the factors of knowledge, Kant will show that metaphysics in the traditional sense, that is, transcendent metaphysics, is not possible. So whether metaphysics is possible or not, we shall not assume that metaphysics is possible. We shall not assume that metaphysics is not possible. We shall undertake a critical inquiry, and only after this inquiry we can answer this question. That is why I started by saying that for Kant, epistemology precedes metaphysics. Now let us see what are the conditions of human knowledge. According to Kant, there are two faculties of knowledge: sensibility and understanding. These are the two faculties. And for knowledge, we require the cooperation of both these faculties. Here also, Kant's view is different from both the rationalist and the empiricist. They admitted only one faculty of knowledge, either reason or experience. And the rationalist tried to show the difference between reason and sense experience is one of degrees. Leibniz held such a view, but Kant does not admit it. They are fundamentally different faculties. Functionally different. One cannot be reduced to the other. They are functionally different. They perform different functions. And both of them are necessary for knowledge. Sensibility is the faculty of intuitions. It is a passive faculty. It is a passive faculty. Understanding is the faculty of concepts. It is an active faculty. So in the knowledge situation, we have two faculties combining with each other. One providing us with intuitions and another providing us with concepts. For knowledge, we require both intuitions and concepts. Both factors are necessary for knowledge, intuition and concept. Sensibility, as I have already said, is a passive faculty. What does it do? It is a receptive faculty. It is the faculty of receiving representation from outside. It receives sense experience. Through sense experience, something enters into my mind, and the faculty of mind, there are two faculties. Sensibility, which is a faculty in me, it merely receives something from outside, and it comes through the senses. The object is there. Let us consider this table. I look at this table. This table is in contact with my eyes. I press the table. I feel hardness, and these sensations enter into our mind. And the faculty called sensibility receives these impressions which come from outside. So unless an object is given, nothing can enter into our mind. An object, the mind must be affected by the objects through the senses. So sense experience is the starting point of knowledge, as I have already said. Unless the mind is affected by the objects through the senses, we cannot receive anything, and unless we receive anything, the process of knowledge does not start. We cannot create the objects that we are going to see. Simply by shutting my eyes, I cannot say what is there. I have to appeal to my sense experience. Now, the faculty called sensibility is a receptive faculty. It receives. That is why I have said it is the faculty of intuition. Now, when it receives, this is the Kantian position. Knowledge does not consist, as the empiricist thought, in merely receiving something. No. Merely receiving something from outside does not generate knowledge. does not give us knowledge. Knowledge does not consist in passive reception. When the sensibility receives something, there are two forms in it, space and time. These are the forms of sensibility. Whenever sensibility receives something, it receives it in space and time. Space and time are the forms of sensibility. They are a priori. Space and time do not come from outside. They are not empirical. I will mention just one argument for saying that space is not empirical, because this will help you understand how space is a priori. Space is not an empirical concept which has been received from experience. Why? I say that this object is outside of me. It is outside of me. This object is beside those chairs. Now, one can say that we have obtained the idea of space from these experiences of outsidedness, besidedness. Kant will say, no. To say that this object is outside of me is to say that this object occupies a space which is different from the space which I occupy. So, the idea of space is already presupposed when we say that this is outside of me or this is beside of me. So, since the idea of space is presupposed for our experiences of outsidedness and besidedness, spatial relations, space cannot be derived from such experiences, because the space is the condition for having such experiences. So that which is the condition of experience cannot itself be obtained from experience. That must be prior to experience. So space is a priori. In the same way, time is also a priori. I need not give all the arguments. Space is a priori. So what happens in the knowledge situation? When we receive impressions from outside, we receive them in space and time. And these two forms are the forms of sensibility. They are called also forms of intuition. The object, which we obtain from outside, these are empirical intuitions, matter. And these forms are space and time. So sensibility, there are two aspects. There is the matter and there is the form. The matter we obtain from sense experience, and the form is there in the mind. So, there are a priori factors in knowledge. Space and time are a priori factors. A priori factors contributed by sensibility. Whenever we know any object, we know it to be in space and time. There can be no object which is not in space and time. But this is not to say that space and time are physical things like tables and chairs. No. This is our way of seeing. This is an apparatus which we use when we receive, when we know an object. So, this is an instrument for knowledge. Space and time, these forms, these are instruments of our knowing things, of our way of understanding. But knowledge does not consist simply in having this spatio-temporalized manifold of sense. What do we have still now? I have seen red, I have seen color, there is a shape, there is a size, I press it, I feel hardness. So we have a manifold of sense or sense intuition, objects of sense intuition. It is not still an object. I have not yet obtained knowledge of an object. I have not yet known that this is a table. Knowledge is judgmental. I have received something, I have put the forms of space and time, so we have a multiplicity. manifold of sense. We do not yet have determinate knowledge of an object. We have indeterminate something. So we have to, as I have already said, knowledge is always judgmental. Without judgment, there can be no knowledge. So unless I can make a judgment, I cannot have any knowledge. So judgment we have to make. I have to make a judgment, this is a table or this table is white, etc. This is a judgment. Now, is it possible? So what is required? When I say this is a table, this means that all these features that I have earlier spoken of, that is color, that is its color, its shape, its size, these are all of this table, of a unitary object. In saying that this is a table, I have said that it has color, it has shape, it has size, etc. So all these are unified. Now how is this unification possible? How is this synthesis of the given manifold, the manifold of sense possible? Can sensibility do this task of synthesis? No, because it is a passive faculty. In order to synthesize, the mind has to be active. And sensibility, being a passive faculty, cannot perform this task of synthesis, which requires activity on the part of the mind. That is why Kant admits another faculty, which is an active faculty. And this faculty is understanding. Understanding is the faculty of concepts. Whenever we judge, we use concepts. Understanding is the faculty of judgment, and understanding is also the faculty of concept. A concept is, unlike an intuition, which is an immediate representation of an object, a concept is the immediate representation of an object. For example, when I have the concept of table, when do I have a concept of table? In order to have the concept of a table, I must have observed many particular tables. So, a concept, how do we arrive at a concept? It is the mediate knowledge, not immediate knowledge. It is mediated by the consciousness of some common mark or marks, which many things have in common. When I say it is a table, I have considered the common characters of all tables, and I form the concept T. So unless we use concept, we cannot make judgment. So in every judgment, we have to use concept. And understanding is the source of these concepts. I make a judgment, the table is brown. And when I make the judgment, the table is brown, I have knowledge. I have knowledge. But here, understanding, what does understanding? Understanding has synthesized these diverse elements, the manifold of sense, into a unity, and we have obtained a judgment. And in making this judgment, the table is brown, we have used the concept of table and the concept of brownness. These are concepts. These concepts cannot be obtained from sensibility. Understanding is its source. But the question is, are these concepts pure concepts or empirical concepts? The concept of table and the concept of brown, both are empirical concepts, because unless you have experiences of many tables, unless you have observed many brown things, you cannot have the concept of brown or the concept of table. So these are empirical concepts. So in this judgment, we have made use of empirical concept. But Kant's point is, here comes the point. Understanding, just as there are some forms of sensibility, there are also some forms of the understanding. When we make judgments, the different types of judgment can be brought under certain forms. When I say the table is brown, I mean that this is a unitary object, this is a substance, this has an attribute. So when I say the table is brown, I have made use of concept. When I say the table is brown, I mean to say the table is existent. So existence is another concept which I have used. And Kant classifies the different forms of judgment. All the different types of judgment can be brought under 12 forms, Kant says. Whatever judgment you make, they can be classified, brought under 12. There are 12 forms of judgment. And as I have already said, when I make a judgment, I have to use concept. Without concept, there can be no judgment. So, since there are 12 forms of judgment, corresponding to each form of judgment, there is the application of a concept. So, how many concepts are there? 12 concepts. These concepts are pure concepts, concepts not obtained from experience. The concept of table is empirical. The concept of brown is empirical. But the concept, substance attribute concept has been used here. Behind the concept of table, behind the concept of brown, I have also used the concept of substance attribute. When I say this is a table, this means it has a cause. The table has been produced. It is an effect. So I have used the category, another concept, causality concept. These pure original concepts Kant calls categories, which are the forms of understanding. So understanding unites, understanding synthesizes, and when it synthesizes, it uses these forms. These forms are embodied in the categories. Kant called the pure concepts of the understanding categories. So there are 12 categories in all, and in judgments, he brings them under 4 heads: quality, quantity, relation, and modality. From each type, we have used one concept. A concept of quality is there, a concept of quantity is there, a concept of relation is there, a concept of modality, relation, and concept of modality is there. When I say the table is brown, this means the table is actual. This is actual. It is possible. It is also possible. Whatever is actual is possible. So we have made use of concepts. So how does knowledge arise? Knowledge arises through the cooperation of 2 faculties, sensibility and understanding. First of all, we receive something from outside. When the mind is affected, these sense impressions are obtained in space and time, which are not, space and time are not empirical, they are a priori. And these spatio-temporalized forms, these spatio-temporalized intuitions, empirical intuitions, are synthesized by the understanding with the help of the application of a priori forms of understanding categories. As a result, we have knowledge which is judgmental. Isn't it so? This is how knowledge arises. Now, if this is how knowledge arises, this is Kant's analysis of cognition, and here Kant gives a revolutionary view, which is called Copernican revolution. This Kantian analysis is called Copernican revolution in philosophy. The pre-Copernican view, the pre-Kantian view as regards epistemology was this: knowledge conforms to objects. This was the pre-Kantian view. This is how knowledge arises. Knowledge conforms to objects means knowledge is determined by objects. Objects are out there, objects are real, independently existing objects, and knowledge arises. How? They are determined by objects. And if knowledge is determined by objects, it is a reflection of mind. It is a mirror. It reflects. It merely reflects. It remains passive. It does nothing itself. So we can explain empirical knowledge. If knowledge is determined by objects, we can explain empirical knowledge by means of it. By means of experience, we can say the wall is white. This type of knowledge can be explained on this hypothesis. That's okay. A priori, empirical, synthetic, a posteriori knowledge can be explained on this hypothesis. Another type of knowledge can be explained by conceptual analysis. We can have a priori knowledge, analytic a priori knowledge. But this view, the pre-Kantian view, fails to explain the possibility of synthetic a priori knowledge. How can we have a priori knowledge of objects? This view cannot explain this type of judgment. And that is why Kant offers the hypothesis: objects conform to knowledge. Objects conform to knowledge. Objects are determined by knowledge. Objects are determined by the knowing mind. How? As I have already explained. Objects of knowledge are determined by sensibility and understanding. Objects of knowledge are determined by the forms of sensibility and the forms of understanding. As I have already said, human knowledge, this is how human knowledge is possible. This is not the case that in order to know, I have to know this in this way. Every human cognizer, this is how they have to know. They have to use this apparatus. Space-time, spatio-temporal framework, and the forms of the understanding. Now, if knowledge is determined by the forms of sensibility and the forms of understanding, if that is how the object is known, what type of object do we know? Do we know the table as it is, or as it appears to me through these forms? Which one? As it appears to me through the forms of space, through the spatio-temporal form and these concepts. This is our way of knowing things. It must enter into our mind through these forms. Mind imposes certain forms upon these objects, and thereby we have knowledge. Therefore, our knowledge is limited to phenomena, appearances. We can know only what appears to us through the forms of space and time, and through the forms of sensibility, through spatio-temporal framework, and the categories of the understanding. We cannot know the object as it is. That is to say, we can know only phenomena. Things in themselves are unknown and unknowable. Things in themselves cannot be known. Reality as such, we do not know the object as it is. The real object, what is its real character, we do not know. It may have a character of its own, but it is not possible for us to know that character. We know the object as it appears to us through this spatio-temporal framework and the categorical framework. So this is Kant's conclusion. And this is called Copernican revolution in philosophy. Why? Because the pre-Copernican view, Kantian view, is analogous to Copernicus's revolution in astronomy. The pre-Copernican view in astronomy was the earth is the center of the universe, geocentric hypothesis, and the sun and the other heavenly bodies move around the earth. This was the geocentric hypothesis. Now Copernicus turned the tables. He says, no, the sun is at the center, and the earth and the other heavenly bodies move around the sun. Heliocentric hypothesis. So what was at the center was now put into at the base, shifted from the center. It was not there in the center. This was Copernicus's view. But the point remains how to account for the fact that we see the sun moving, we see the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. How to explain it, this fact? Copernicus explained this phenomenon by saying that, yes, you see the sun moving, but that is not the movement of sun. That is not the real movement of the sun. The motion that you see in the sun is your motion. You are on earth, you are moving, and since you are moving, you are projecting your motion. The sun, as a result, you see the sun moving. So the motion that you see is not the real motion of the sun. It is only an appearance, apparent motion. In the same way, Kant has said, what? What you see is not the real object. What you see is only an appearance. Only an appearance. Now it might appear someone that the Kantian revolution, this is called revolutionary view. It is anti-Copernican because it is Ptolemaic. It is geocentric retardation. On Ptolemy's view, the earth was at the center. And on Copernicus' view, the sun is at the center. So, how is it that Kant's view is similar to Copernicus' view? In placing man at the center of the universe, anthropocentric view, Kant's view is anthropocentric. He is laying emphasis upon earth. So, how do you compare him with Copernicus? Why not compare his view with Ptolemy? Now, to think in this way is to misunderstand Kant. The real point of analogy, Kant's revolution is Copernican. We have to understand the real point of analogy. Both Copernicus and Kant have offered subjective explanation of apparently objective phenomena. Apparently, this table appears, apparently this table is in space, is in time, space, time, these are real features of the table. Isn't it so? Space, time appears to be the real feature of this table. It is spatial, it is temporal, and these features are there in the object. But what is Kant's explanation? These features are not in the object. These features are in the mind. You are putting these features, imposing these features on the object when you know. So this apparently the subjective explanation of apparently objective phenomena. In this respect, both Kant and Copernicus, they have said the same thing. Both have explained what is apparently objective from the subjective point of view. This is Kant's Copernican revolution. Now what is the consequence of it? The consequence is, if this is how knowledge arises, what is the consequence? Transcendent metaphysics is not possible. Isn't it so? Because, first of all, you require intuition. Intuition comes from outside through senses, and we cannot have intuition of God. God cannot be presented in sense experience. Therefore, we cannot have knowledge of God, soul, or the universe as a whole. So, what is the consequence of Kant's Copernican revolution? The consequence is transcendent metaphysics is not possible. But then, it is a great loss. For 2000 years, philosophers have been concerned with such questions. They have tried to give us knowledge about such entities. Kant says, this is not a real loss. This is a loss. This is a loss for the monopoly of the schools. It does not matter for the interests of humanity. This loss is loss for the monopoly of the schools. They are monopolized. This is not a real loss. If you really have something, then you can lose it. We had never this. We had never such things. We had never such knowledge. So we cannot say that we have lost it. But as a matter of fact, Kant says that although he has denied the possibility of transcendent metaphysics, by doing this, he has done a great service. He has severed the roots of atheism materialism regarding those entities, God, soul. You cannot prove the existence of God, yes, but you cannot disprove it also. Theoretical reason is incapable of making any judgment about these entities. Theoretical reason, by theoretical reason, you cannot have knowledge about these things because they are beyond the boundaries of sense. But Kant says, I have found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. By denying knowledge of such entities, he says, he has left open the possibility of another kind of metaphysics, practical metaphysics, metaphysics of morals. God, soul, universe, this God, immortality of soul, freedom, these are the postulates of morality. We cannot know God, but we can think about God. And God, immortality of the soul, and freedom are the postulates of morality. Morality demands that we admit such entities. Theoretical reason will not be able to give us knowledge about it, but practical reason, reason in action, demands that we admit such entities. So practical, this is the demand of practical reason. Morality demands that there be freedom. Unless there is freedom, morality is not possible. But if everything is subject to the law of causation, natural causality, every event has a cause, then freedom is not possible. But if freedom is not possible, morality is not possible. So what can we do? We can say we have to make a distinction between self, the empirical self, the self as it appears to us in this phenomenal world, and the self as it is, nominal self, which is concerned with morality. So this is how Kant saves morality from the attacks of the skeptics, atheists, all. Thank you all.
Sir, if according to Kant, the knowing subject determines, conditions the knowledge of the object, then how is the knowledge of the impossibility of the knowledge of the noumena determined, conditioned by the knowing subject?
No. I am trying to answer your question. Phenomena are the objects of possible experience.
Okay.
And whatever is an object of possible experience can be known. Noumena or noumenon is the singular, noumena, plural. They are unknown and unknowable. They can be thought, but they cannot be known, because one of the conditions of knowledge, what is the condition of knowledge? Whenever we know, first of all we have to have intuition. And this intuition is sensuous intuition. Then we have to apply the forms. But in this case, what is lacking? We do not have any sense experience. God cannot be presented to us as an object of sense intuition. And therefore, we cannot apply the forms. If we apply the forms, then what we have, we say God is the cause of this universe. We have made this judgment, but this is a wrong employment of a category. You have applied the category of causality. Where is this category applicable? Applicable only to objects of possible experience. When do we apply the categories? When we have received something on the basis of experience, then we apply the categories, and as a result we have knowledge. But here you are applying a category to an entity which is outside the realm of experience. So this is a wrong employment of a category, and therefore this transcendental use. Reason has an empirical employment. Empirical employment is genuine, but this transcendental employment, this is a wrong employment, and this results in illusion. We do not have knowledge, this is an illusion.
So when you were saying that, when give the example of the table,
What strikes me is that when each person looks at a particular object, he looks at it in a different way. So, is there a generalization of the way in which, like, the sensibilities, the things that we are taking in, and then when we are making the judgment, is it a universal type of judgment, or is it a particular type of, in the sense that we are looking at it in our own particular understanding? Or is Kant saying that there are certain laws by which we understand?
Yes. According to Kant, Kant's framework is an absolutist framework. The conditions of knowledge, these forms that we employ, these forms are universal and necessary. These are the conditions which are not peculiar to this or that subject. It is not that if I am to know, I have to know it through the forms of space and time and the categories. And if you are to know, you need not apply this. Any knower, any human cognizer, this is his framework. Just see, there is only one door here, through which you can go outside. There is here, another here. Okay. There are two doors which you can use for exit and entry. Now, so far as, this is just to take an example. Now, if I say, how would you go out of this room? What are the possibilities? These are the only two ways through which you can enter and you can go. They are in any one of you. Not for me only, for any one of you. These are the only two possibilities. The same is the case in the knowledge situation. If any human knower is to know, he has to know the forms of intuition, that is space and time. He has to know that it is in space, it is in time, and he has to apply these categories. You see? Now, what is unique about Kant, is this: Kant has humanized science. Kant has humanized science. Science is not passive observation. Science is not, knowledge does not consist in passively receiving something. The mind has an active role to play. In knowledge situation, we are not passive observers. Kant says that nature, intellect does not receive its laws from nature. Rather, it imposes its laws upon nature. We cannot depend upon nature so that she will reveal her secrets to us. What we have to do, we have to question nature. We have to experiment, conduct experiment. We have to raise questions in the form of doubts, theories, ideas. And then we will try to bring out the answer from nature. So, understanding maketh nature, Kant says. Understanding maketh nature. Maketh nature means does not create nature, of course. Creation is possible for God if we believe in such an entity. Intellectual intuition, it is not possible for us. We cannot directly, understanding cannot directly intuit the object. It has to proceed discursively. Something has to be given. Unless something is given, knowledge cannot start. A potter produces some object, but unless the clay is given, he cannot produce. So he makes the pot, but we cannot say he is the creator. He is the creator. Understanding maketh nature. Nature is the sum total of known and knowable objects. And we make nature by imposing our laws, the laws of our mind. So Kant has any science, be it theoretical or experimental, is a human creation. It is a human creation. Creation in the sense that human beings put some laws. He does not merely receive something from nature. And just as man is the lawgiver of nature, he is also the lawgiver of morals, Kant will say. Moral laws, they come from the practical reason. So Kant has humanized science, Kant has humanized ethics. Man occupies a central, the fourth question, what is a human being? Man occupies a central position. There is autonomy, he is insisting upon autonomy. In the cognitive field, we have autonomy. We can put something. In the field of morals, we have autonomy. Unless we have autonomy, morality is not possible. We have autonomy. We make laws. We are the maker of the moral laws. The moral laws come from our practical reason. They are not dictated to us from outside. Okay.
So just one question. When Kant asserted that knowledge is judgmental, do you think in a way Kant anticipated Habermas by relating knowledge and human interests?
No, so far as human interest is concerned, this question is connected with his question of morality. Kant says that we have to pay attention to the interests of morality, that interests of human beings. Interest of human beings. Morality must be preserved. We have moral consciousness and we have to admit freedom. Unless we admit freedom, if everything is theoretically knowable, then there is no scope for freedom. And if there is no scope for freedom, there is no scope for morality. Morality is possible. The highest interests of mankind, the highest interests of mankind, they are the moral postulates. God, soul and universe as a whole. These are matters of highest concern for mankind. God is above us, moral law is within us, and immortality is after us, God says. Interests of mankind. For the interests of humanity will not suffer if we say that theoretical reason has limits. Theoretical reason has limits. Science is not the whole of reality. Science is limited to the phenomenal world. And Kant has himself established a new kind of metaphysics, apart from the one that I have said. We can have a metaphysics about phenomena. This is scientific metaphysics. The different sciences are concerned with phenomena, but a particular aspect of phenomena. But we can have a metaphysics which can be obtained by pure reason. Regarding any phenomena, we can say something about their general nature. This is not studied in any science, any particular science. Regarding any science we can say, regarding any phenomena we can say that any phenomenon that it is in space, it is in time, it is a substance having some attribute, it is a cause or it is an effect. If it is a substance, then it has interaction with other substances. This we can say. This is a type of knowledge. Take any object, barring, excepting three special objects, namely God. So metaphysica generalis and metaphysica specialis. You have to make a distinction. Metaphysica specialis is concerned with special objects, God's soul. Barring or accepting these three, we can have knowledge. Metaphysica generalis. And this general metaphysics will give us knowledge about the general feature of all phenomena. The general nature of all phenomena, that is their spatio-temporal character and their categorical forms. This we can obtain. This is an a priori knowledge, about phenomena. And this is a new kind of metaphysics which Platon calls metaphysics of experience. Ken Smith calls immanent metaphysics. Dreyer calls metaphysics of phenomena, which has been designated in various ways. So Kant has established a new kind of metaphysics which is scientific metaphysics. Metaphysics as a science. It is concerned with phenomena. It is also concerned with phenomena, not with suprasensible entities.
I know you have a lot of questions, but I think since we have to move exactly on schedule. Okay.
Sir, I just have a query. At one place you said that with regard to the motion of the sun, that we are imposing our motion to the sun. So is it so that Kant is trying to say that we are always confined to appearance, and so we are unable to know the reality at all?
Yes. Our knowledge is limited to appearance, objects of possible experience. The real object we cannot know.
Just add to this, this notion of real object. Kant is not using this notion. There is not something he calls real.
Thing in itself.
It's Ding an sich. Yeah, it's a thing in itself.
Yes.
It's a big difference because he has not this dichotomy, yeah, of real and unreal in the center of his
thing in itself and phenomena.
But just what I want to say to you, I mean, of course, Kant was caught up in the old paradigm of a mind, you call it. It is called by him transcendental subjectivity.
Yes.
Yeah? And on the other side, the sensual data streaming on us. So this old paradigm, he was still caught up. Yeah? And of course, in the course of later philosophy, even following Kant and his transcendental turn, this dichotomy between sensual data and subjectivity, receiving it, was of course very critically removed, especially in the philosophy of language, yeah, and to look at language games or whatever, Wittgenstein then, and there is not this dual world anymore, yeah, of sense data and of a subjectivity, so he's breaking up, yeah, and then also this question of interest and in epistemology plays a crucial role because we are guided by interests when we look at things and create knowledge. So in that context, one has to leave some paradigms. Kant was still caught in empiricism also, were overcome later on, yeah? And so I think the transcendental turn is something we cannot go behind again after Kant. But the paradigms he is describing, this epistemology, this has been renewed completely later on. Yeah?
And the notion of thing in itself has come under severe attack. And the modern interpreters of Kant and who try to defend Kant interpret thing in itself in two ways. The same object, the thing in itself is not an object which causes something. This is not how they interpret it. We are not dealing with two kinds of objects, the nominal object and the phenomenal object. We are dealing with the same object considered from two different points of view. Object in relation to our mode of cognition and the object which is not in relation. So there are no two objects, there is only one object. Our concern is not, we are not committed to any ontological theory, thing in itself as an ontological entity. It is a methodological or epistemological question. The same object can be viewed from two different perspectives. The object when it is in relation to our cognitive apparatus and when it is not so. Thing in itself is a tricky notion, and Hegel and the post-Kantian philosophers have shown that this notion of thing in itself is self-contradictory, but that is a different story. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. Well, for two reasons I would very specifically emphasize. One is he has made unreadable Kant readable to us. at least to some of us, I think. So that way we must thank him very much. This is number one. And number two, I think he has also set the ground for the second session. That is the takeoff point for the second session. Moral philosophy, political philosophy, well, how it takes off from where he stops in the first critique, and that has been explained very clearly. So with these words, I thank him again very much.